Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Amazon, proud sponsor of WPLN's daily show, This Is Nashville, engaging our differences so we can discover our unity. More on Amazon's community work at aboutamazon.com.
I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. Hyman, Strickland, McKissick. If you recognize these names, then you know at least some of Nashville's storied architectural history. Our city has been graced with some of the most beautiful buildings in the region. And as time moves on, there's a new generation of architects who are designing the look of our town, setting a template for the future, if you will. Who are these young architects, and what led them to where they are today? Well, joining us to talk about their love of architecture and the joys as well as challenges of working in the new Nashville are Joseph Cole, CEO of Culture Architecture and Design, Amy Hardin, Senior Project Manager and Senior Architect at Gresham Smith, and Brittany Hodge, Project Architect at EOA. I want to thank you all for being here. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Really a lot of fun. Okay, so all three of you have taken different paths that have led you to architecture. Joseph, we're going to start with you. How'd you become interested in the field?
I think most architects have some type of epiphany moment where they say, aha, I want to be an architect. That's not the case for me. I have always wanted to be an architect. So, ever since a little kid, whenever my parents would take us to the grocery store, in the vestibule, there's these property listed magazines. And I would always ask my parents, hey, grab the magazines. And I would take those home and I would redraw all the houses in those magazines. And I would tell my mom and dad, hey, I want to change this house into a library. And I want to change this house into, a fire station or a school. And, they probably thought it was weird at the time. But, fast forward to the future and I become an architect and it all makes sense, right? I had a lot of people that invested in me over the years. Through high school, I did a program called ACE, which stands for Architecture, Construction, and Engineering, which they really pointed me towards the direction of architecture. They said, hey, your interest in buildings aligns with architecture proper. You just mentioned the McKissicks. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a church that was actually designed by the McKissicks, and the McKissick family attended that church. So architecture has always been around me, but I gradually came to it, over time.
Were you like a little kid in kindergarten checking out the foundations of the school, making sure everything was right?
So, my mom would be so proud. My mom has all of the arts and crafts since kindergarten, and all of them have something to do with the building. So they're clay houses and, popsicle stick buildings. And she literally has all of them. They're all over the piano and knickknacks and bookcases at the house. So yeah, that's been me my entire life.
Collector's items one day. Amy,
Yep.
how'd you fall into the field?
Yes. So similar to Joseph, I had fond memories of going to older homes with my mom around in rural West Tennessee. So looking at great architecture around me, and didn't really decide to go into architecture, though, until later. I was really interested in English and writing, and then was talking with my brother, and he mentioned it to me. He's like, well, you have a fondness for architecture, so why don't you do it? And then fell in love and decided to go to Knoxville and get my degree.
This similar to Joseph, does your mom or family have like copies of all the drawings you used to do when you were a kid?
Oh, probably not too many. I wasn't a great craftswoman, so a lot of them weren't worth keeping.
All right.
But she mentioned Knoxville. Our paths actually crossed in undergrad, so we became good friends in college.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Small world.
Very small world.
This is Nashville, making connections. Brittany, how'd you get into it?
Yeah, so Joseph and I were probably cut from the same cloth maybe because I had a very similar experience. I remember being like, 10, 11 years old, like very young, and my dad had taken me and my sister to a bookstore ahead of going on vacation, as you do. And I was like going through all the magazines and looking through them. I think that was kind of my interest at the time. And I had seen like Southern Living, Log Homes, like all these sort of magazines that have floor plans in them that I thought were so cool. And then my dad bought me some graph paper. And sure enough, I was like piecemealing all the pieces of the houses together and trying to figure out, what's my Barbie dream house and trying to decide, what are the things that I value. And then I started to enroll in some classes in high school for architecture and engineering and also some art classes. And I think I found a real love for engineering and art. And architecture is like the most beautiful intersection of those two things, I think, where you really get to be creative, but also very pragmatic. And I'm a big problem solver at heart. So for me, that was like a really great fit. So that's kind of where I ended up meeting architecture.
I'm curious about like the path you have to take as far as education to become an architect. There's more than one direct way, right?
There's a few ways. The way that I did it was Bachelor of Architecture. There's some people who come into it and get a master's degree. Yeah,
it's kind of in terms of education, there's like 5-year programs, which a lot of, I think, the South has, which is a 5-year professional degree. And then I did what we kind of refer to as a 4-2, which is a 4-year of undergrad and then a 2-year master's. And that's kind of the route I took. And I took a little time in between those two things, which I think was really great to get some experience out in the world, to be able to then go back and to my master's program with some real world knowledge on how I can apply that in school.
Joseph?
And then I did the 5-year program myself, but we actually have some people on our team at Culture that did the 4+3 program, so 7 years. So I don't think a lot of people realize that architects go through so much schooling. It's almost like becoming a doctor. So
And you continue to go to school and to continue training throughout your careers, right?
Right. So, you have the schooling, and then, I'm a little older, so we call it an internship, but it's more like an apprenticeship.
Okay.
That could be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on how you matriculate through the program. And then there's a series of 7 tests that I believe the shortest one is like 4 hours long, at least when I took it. So.
I think they've updated it to 5 tests now.
Oh, see? Yeah, I'm OG.
Lucky dogs.
Yep.
All right, so tell me about like in the apprentice stage of your training. What were some of the things that you learned from the architects that came before you, Amy?
Yeah, so I actually apprenticed under a architect who had not gone through the educational program. He actually went from the apprenticeship program, which was recognized still in the 80s. And so when I was working for Mr. Fletcher, he would train me on constructability and more of those real world scenarios that Brittany was mentioning.
Brittany?
Yeah. When I first moved to Nashville, I worked for kind of like an architect developer team, which was a really unique experience, I think, because it taught me not only about how to be an architect, but also land acquisition and asset management and some of those like crazy things that I can't even imagine looking back at learning as a 21-year-old. But yeah, he taught me so much. His name was Greg Hayden. He taught me so much about how, again, constructability, like you mentioned, Amy. At the time, we were working in AutoCAD, which is a program that we use to kind of like model buildings. AutoCAD at the time was a very kind of 2-dimensional tool. And today we work more in Revit, which is very much more of a 3-dimensional tool. But at the time when I worked in my apprenticeship, I was in all AutoCAD. And I think that's kind of maybe irregular for the profession these days to have a lot of experience in AutoCAD. So I drew everything in 2D. Whereas in Revit today, there's so many great tools that it kind of helps do the work for you to some degree. But I didn't have maybe that complete luxury when I first started. So I really got a lot of detailed experience in that 2D world and understanding how things go together.
Okay. Now, Joseph, tell me, what's the relationship between like a new architect and their, as an apprentice and their teachers? What's that relationship like?
So, when it comes to that apprenticeship, I think you got to find someone that you admire and that you want to pour into you, but also that wants to pour into you. It's a symbiotic relationship. I think as a young professional, we often see people that we admire But it's kind of a one-way relationship. So when you're a young professional, looking towards people that also are invested in you and your success as well, and then also having more than one mentor. Having a mentor that can do provide various perspectives and different things. So in my case, I've always been interested in business, right? So a lot of the mentors in architecture were more design and construction focused. So a lot of my mentors came from outside of the industry. And I'll also say make sure you have a mentor that works outside of your employer to give you some outside perspective. I think a lot of times it's easier to just find someone that sits at the desk next to you that's also working on the same project, but going outside of your immediate circle. And then the last thing I would say is get out of your office and volunteer. When you volunteer, that's a good way to find a mentor and build your network in a really genuine way versus just, going out and handing out business cards and your resume.
I'm sure, these past few years, the last decade in Nashville is exciting for young architects like yourselves. There's so much construction, so much building happening. What are some of the highlights of working in a city like Nashville with all this building and renovation happening? Britt?
Yeah, I think we live in probably the best place and the best time to be a young architect in the world. I mean, I don't know. I really think that there's so much going on. I mean, I moved here 10 years ago, and even just seeing the amount of growth that's happened over the past 10 years is phenomenal. I think what I'm excited to see has a lot to do with our East Bank development that's happening very soon. I think that is a project on a scale that is not happening anywhere else. And we all have a really great opportunity to have a say in what happens there and how that grows our city.
Amy, what are some of the challenges that come with and the constraints of building in this new Nashville? There's limited space. Obviously certain parts of the city and other cities are kind of building out. But I was talking to someone a couple of days ago. They said Nashville is going to have to start building up. What are the challenges with that?
So there are a lot of historical properties and existing fabric that we want to maintain just because of the history of Nashville, but we also need to accommodate this great new growth. We just need to be really deliberate in how we're doing it. And so, looking at our planning guidelines and the possibilities of how we're doing infill on these odd lots, it's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of possibility there. So it's about moving fast, but being really thoughtful.
Mm-hmm. The shelf life on a building, it can expire, and there's a few choices. Tear it down, build a new one, renovate, and retrofit to meet the updated codes and requirements. What are some of the deciding factors with some of these historical buildings we're looking at, Amy?
So in some cases, there is the protection that might be warranted for some of these buildings if they're in a historic overlay, and if there's actually parameters that provide guidance on the protection of it. Of course, there's a cost analysis about if it's really beneficial to retrofit those buildings. That comes into a big play about what is the cost analysis for that client.
And you're shaking your head in agreement, Joseph. Is that something like, I understand like to retrofit a building, it's got to be affordable for it. But what about like the environment and sustainability? I know we're going to get into that a little bit in the next segment, but I'm just curious about how those options play into the decision whether to preserve a historic building or not.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, a variety of factors when it comes to sustainability. We're looking at carbon footprint. We're looking at, what the new program is that'll be on that site. So it has to be a holistic approach when we're looking at, how are we going to rehab this building and what goes into the new building. I think a lot of times when it comes to existing buildings, there's a fine line between old building and historic building, right? Mm-hmm. And it's, this building just may be old and may not necessarily be historic. And is this building actually worth preserving?
Gotcha. Okay, now, Brittany and Joseph, I understand that your firms are on the team national. There's a national team, but you're representing the local firms that are a part of working on the new Titan Stadium. And I know you guys can't talk too much about the specifics of that, but how does that work? How is the work divided between the national and the local teams? I'm curious.
So with that, there's an architect of record, and that architect of record is TVS, and they're based out of Atlanta. And then the local firms, that being Culture, Architecture, and Design, EOA, and then Community Solutions by Design, are 3 firms here in Nashville, are working underneath their leadership. And in that, we're taking their direction through design and delegation to execute the design and drawings.
All right. Now, I understand, Brittany, there's something special happening later on this week that you guys are working on.
Yeah, a part of AIA. We are going to have a lecture series for the American Institute of Architects, Middle Tennessee, and we are going to be talking about the potential of a city architect, and that's happening Thursday at the Frist Art Museum.
Okay, that sounds really cool. All right, we're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll explore community-based architecture, public architecture, and sustainability in architecture, and how those things can be applied right here in Music City. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. We're back for our discussion with some of the new architects in Music City. I'm joined by Amy Harden, Senior Project Manager and Senior Architect at Gresham Smith, Brittany Hodge, Project Architect at EOA, and I'd like to welcome Brenda Cano Trejo. She is a designer with Culture, Architecture, and Design. Thank you all for being with us. Really fun. All right, so I do want to talk about some of the community-based architecture and sustainability in architecture that's really important to a lot of people. But first, I want to learn a little bit about you, Brenda. How did you come to work? How did you come to be a designer at Culture, Architecture, and Design firm?
You know, it's crazy because I was hearing y'all's story talking about all the programs that different schools offered and just kind of like it being something that was in the back of your mind. I think I had very similar approach to that. I very much related how Brittany talked about how architecture was just like the conjoining of like engineering and art and that kind of bringing her attention. And I was very similar in that aspect of when I was in high school, I was very much into art and I excelled a lot in math and science. So it just kind of made sense to me.
Who fostered that interest in you?
Yeah, so I actually have an uncle who he works at an engineering firm. And so when I was thinking about what electives I wanted to take in high school, he very much guided me towards a similar program to ACE. Mm-hmm. So I did go through that in high school. And I think that all the pieces just kind of started coming together.
Magically, it all was designed for you all to be here. Sorry for the bad pun. I couldn't help myself.
We do it all the time.
Okay. All right. So, but tell me this, Brittany, you work at a firm that focuses on, quote, finding projects in the community that really matters. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think, we are in a growing city, and with growth comes a few pains, for sure. And I think that, at EOA specifically and where I work, we're just trying to create kind of like a better place for people and trying to really make an impact on people's lives while also, sustaining the environment that we have. So yeah, we're really interested in solving some of our community-based projects that I think are concerns of the community right now. As architects, legally, in getting a license, we're sort of obligated to hold up and to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare, those three big things. But I think there's also sort of an ethical dilemma when it comes to architects about how can we go beyond that like basic legal obligation and really ethically dive into some of these issues that are surrounding our communities. And I think in Nashville specifically, I'm thinking of affordable housing is a very hot topic right now. Something that I think everyone is probably dealing with and feeling in some capacity. Transit as well. It's super interconnected to that. I think we would all love to have a little bit of an easier commute. Historic preservation is always something kind of like on our minds in the community as well. How can we preserve those structures and make sure that they're cherished and celebrated for a long time? And then also sustainability is a huge piece of that. And I think the community is also concerned with, climate change and global climate, and how can we make better, more intentional design decisions around those pieces.
What about density? I've only lived here 3 years, but people seem to like their space, where they live, kind of where they're walking, and where they come to gather. They love their space, but the more folks move here, the limited space we have, we're going to have to move up. We're going to have to find ways to practically live on top of each other. What does that look like? How do you all take that into consideration?
Yeah, I think density is a really important thing, and some of that's sort of guided by our zoning code. But I think there is sort of an in-between, or like we've often referred to it as the missing middle, where we have these like big, dense, high-rise type buildings, and then we have single-family homes, and sometimes what we're missing is everything kind of in between those two scales. So not just big apartment buildings, but also townhomes, more like 3-story type of buildings that we're interested in finding kind of in what Amy talked about earlier, looking at how we can find a way to find those pieces in the urban fabric that might be missing to sort of infill with that missing middle.
Now, Amy and Brenda, I see you both nodding. And is this something, well, you're all young architects. Is this something that your generation of architects really has in mind as opposed to the older school?
Most definitely. I would say the Government Relations Committee with American Institute of Architects here for Middle Tennessee has been advocating for some of these possibilities for the past 4 years, because we started in 2020, but have been slowly rolling that in. And it is definitely a topic of conversation and was pretty popular earlier this year with NEST legislation, and council members are also passionate about it.
Okay, so maybe you can answer this for me, Amy. Sometimes you walk into a building and you see a bronze plaque that states that this building is LEED certified, LEED certified. Explain to me what LEED is and why it's important.
Yes, so LEED is a system that will look at the building, and there's different kind of qualifications and point systems to where you can get this sustainable building. It exists for new construction, it exists for interiors and existing buildings. And it's been around since the early 2000s, maybe the late 90s. And that's when I got my LEED certification.
Okay.
Was early on. And it's a really great way to measure your building performance, but also have daylight and look at the health of the occupants for those green buildings.
Do all new buildings in Nashville have to be LEED certified?
No, they do not. There are some standards. If you're going through the entitlements process here in Nashville, you can opt into that LEED rating system, and you're able to get those additional heights of stories because you're getting those sustainable credits.
Okay. Now, Brenda, you are the most recent graduate of the crew.
Yeah.
Tell me about what it was like in school as you're talking with your fellow would-be architects, and you all are talking about some of the things you would want to design in the future. Did you have conversations about sustainability and design while you were in school with them, or what were they like?
Yeah, most definitely. I think being the newest here definitely being more of a younger designer, it's something that is always in the back of our head. I think even when I was in school, we take sustainability classes, issues in city building, like it is something that's very hot topic, I think, coming from a newer generation. Like we have our phones where even if we didn't learn it in school, like we're, learning things online every day and then just kind of putting all the puzzle pieces together. And I think that, when you look at community, sustainability, and everything. Like, it's all intertwined when you think about it. And I think that, definitely coming from a younger generation, I think we love to like have this like holistic view of, how everything intertwines with each other. So.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekolona. We're talking this hour with some of the newest generation of architects in our city. My guests are Amy Hardin, Brittany Hodge, and Brenda Cano Trejo. All right, so, it seems like all of you are thinking really deeply about the impact of your designs as individuals, communities, and the environment, but probably not all architects are out there to do that, I don't want to defame the entire profession. Where is the conflict in that? You're this new generation. You're thinking about sustainable futures, what this city, what the planet is going to be like in the next 50 years while you're here. But I'm sure you have some members of your profession who may not be concerned because they may not be around in 50 years. How do you work through that? How do you talk to them particularly about that?
I think there's also, an expectation of our profession, and I think we're putting more on ourselves as part of the new generation and new architects. It's about more than just the building and the construction of that and the technical nature, right? It goes beyond the impact and the analysis of what we're providing and performing for our clients.
Okay. I'm curious about the materials needed for like some of these sustainable projects. Do any of you, do you follow the work of like material experts to stay abreast on the latest developments of new stuff? Brenda?
Yeah, 100%. I think having good relationships with, different manufacturer reps is really important, having lunch and learns where you're sitting down with them, talking about the product that they're representing. We call them CEUs. We're always, I was talking about this with Brittany earlier, how we're in a profession where we're constantly learning, always a student. So obviously we're not going to know everything about every product that we're introducing into a project, but that's where it's like important to like do your research. Is there something else out there that might help the environment more, like staying on top of things, And technology is always moving forward. So, different manufacturers are finding different ways of creating products in a more safer way. So definitely questions that you bring up.
Brittany, how do you have these conversations? Say you're like tasked to design a project and you're taking a sustainable route. You've discovered a new material that could work. But is it the client's decision or your boss's decision on what materials are used? And how do you go about trying to convince them to do something that's a little bit more sustainable?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. There's some balance there. I think it's definitely our responsibility as architects to do the homework and the research around those materials to understand what the manufacturer is providing. What are the ingredients? What is the embodied carbon of that material? And then bringing that to the client and saying, we've looked at this, we've researched this material. We bring them precedents of projects that it already exists on. And we love to get a representative from that material company to even meet with the owner to say, this is kind of what we're providing. And then, it's conversations with the owner around, is that material meeting kind of the requirements of their program, and maintenance is always kind of a big thought on materials, durability, longevity, all of those types of things. So it's certainly a conversation we have.
Okay. I once lived in a city where they took an old college basketball arena and renovated it using its own materials. What are the positives and negatives of a project like that? Amy?
Yes, so it's always wonderful to reuse materials. I think at one point there were some conversations about all the reclaimed barnwood and how it was being used in Nashville. There's a lot of reworking of the material. You need really great craftspeople to install those materials correctly, and just being really clear and coordinating closely with your general contractor so that they know that those things are coming, and to store those and keep them in good shape.
Okay, so give me a little bit of the hierarchy of how a project works. You've got people on the construction site. You've got the contractors. You've got the architect. You may have some of the supply folks, someone from the city. How does it all work? Who's in your Rolodex? Who are you calling when a project gets started?
That's a really good question.
I would say there's typically an owner-architect-client relationship, and there's a primary contact from each of those folks who are coordinating closely all the time. One of the conversations years ago was like the three-legged stool, right? You need balance, and those three parties are coordinating together the whole time. So that's pretty much the core team that's moving together throughout the project.
And then do you all have relationships with contractors? Do you talk to them while they're out there if you happen to walk by a site?
Yeah, absolutely. Having a relationship with a contractor, I think, is paramount, and to create sort of a symbiotic relationship with that contractor that nobody's, pointing fingers or where kind of conflict comes in. I think it's really about working as a team together, and that's why being able to, the first thing that on a project that I want to do is I just want to get everyone in a room together and figure out how can we all work as a team together and make sure that this project is successful and it is a win-win-win. So I think that that's kind of how I would answer that.
How many projects are you all working on at one time? I imagine it takes a while to just design one. Do they have like 3 buildings and a bridge for you? Like, how does it work?
So I'm working on quite a few. I would say probably averaging about 8 projects right now, but my role is different as a project manager. I'm coordinating with the team and being sure everybody has what they need. So I'm a big collaborator and coordinator. But yeah, I would say it's probably different for Brittany.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of like I typically have one big project that I'm working on in terms of design and really getting my arms around that project and carrying it through each phase of design. And then I may have kind of projects that are that I did work on the design, 1 to 2 years ago, but now it's being constructed. And so I'm working with the contractor to figure out all the details in the field that we may need to coordinate on to make sure that it happens. So maybe 2-3 projects at a time for me.
Okay, this might seem like a really weird question, but you said something that sparked interest to me. Sometimes on television and film productions, they're shooting the movie, they have to rewrite a scene. The writer is there. Has there ever been a situation where things are designed, but you're working with the contractor because the project is started and you have to redesign something? What is that like?
Change management is real. It happens all the time, especially with renovations. You're reacting to some unforeseen condition that wasn't picked up in a building scan or by a site assessment. So there's revisions that happen, and you're working with the contractor during that phase to just get him revised, accurate drawings and being a good partner.
Mm-hmm. I kind of want to talk about the future and some things that I've seen. I've heard of and have seen buildings across the country and in cities where the roofs are being used as green spaces. Sounds like a really cool idea. Sounds like something that would work here in Nashville. Brenda, do you know of anybody who's got that type of idea, or is it something you would like to do?
Definitely something I would like to do in the future. Creating green spaces and just very livable spaces is definitely high up there. When I think about what I want Nashville to look like in the future, ergonomics, I think, goes hand in hand with that too, like always keeping in mind who's utilizing the space and being very conscious about different design decisions that you take when you're designing something. So, yeah.
Would a sky bridge work? A sky bridge / green space in downtown Nashville?
I'm not necessarily sure if it would work in downtown Nashville. But, who never knows? The sky's the limit.
Have you all heard of others like super sustainable innovations that are out there?
I would say some popular current sustainable design would be timber frame construction. That has been pretty popular here lately.
What's that?
So it's a type 4 construction for all my architecture friends out there, but it's heavy timber and there's cross-laminated timber, and that's been a great popular conversation. There's also just analysis in the carbon that goes into concrete. So looking at how we're offsetting some of the carbon use within those superstructures.
All right. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank my guests, Amy Hardin, Senior Project Manager and Senior Architect at Gresham Smith, and Brittany Hodge, Project Architect at EOA. Thank you both for being with us today. Brenda Cano Trejo is going to stick with us through the break. We're going to take one last break. When we return, we'll look at culture and the culture of architecture here in Nashville. You can join the conversation by tweeting us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. We've been talking about architecture in our city with some of the new generation of architects here in Nashville. Now, before the break, we explored the sustainability of new architectural design. Now, let's take a look at the culture of architecture here in Nashville. As new architects become trained and certified, more diversity enters into the discipline. But what's it like here? And how can more people become interested in being an architect? For that, I'd like to welcome back Joseph Cole. He is the CEO of Culture, Architecture, and Design, and Brenda Cano Trejo, who is a designer with Culture, Architecture, and Design. All right, so Joseph, this is your baby. Tell us why you started Culture.
So I have always wanted to have my own practice. And I get a lot of people to say, like, why did you name your practice Culture? Why did you name it, Cole & Partners or Cole & Associates? And, in my experience, I've worked on projects where it was a great client, great project, easy timeline, big budget, and the project turned out terrible. And it's because the design team had, a terrible team culture. Didn't get along, wasn't looking out for one another, didn't have the project's overall success as a priority, kind of had a selfish attitude. And then I've worked on projects with a difficult client, not a great project, tight budget, difficult timeline, and it turned out great. It's because we had, a sense of camaraderie and everyone wanted to see the project turn out great. And in that experience, I realized that culture is the foundation of great design. And in that, I just wanted to base my firm around culture. I knew that culture would be at the forefront of my business. I wanted to ensure that everyone could show up as their authentic selves. So at Culture, most architecture firms are kind of siloed in a particular position, and that it makes sense so that if someone decides to move on to another company, they're easily replaceable. Mm-hmm. At Culture, everyone's a Swiss Army knife, and we embrace that. So Brenda on our team, she is a interior designer, but she's also an architect as well. We have a marketing coordinator that's marketing coordinator by day, but also a comedian by night. We have a project architect that's also into technology, into teaching. We also have another interior architect on our team that's into architecture as well. So everyone on our team is able to show up as our authentic selves, and we just figure out how to make it work. That's our secret sauce.
Awesome. Now, Brenda, how long have you been with Culture?
Yeah, so I'm fairly new. I've been with Culture since last October, so about to hit my 1 year.
Okay. So how do you like the environment? As Joseph was talking, I saw you nodding your head about just how everyone kind of coalesces around a project and each other.
Yeah, no, I love the environment. I think it's really important to feel comfortable to ask questions as a new designer because, you're always learning. You're never going to know everything. So having a safe space where I can, ask dumb questions, even though no question is dumb. Mm-hmm. And then in general, just finding people who I resonate with. We connect on a lot of different levels, me and my coworkers. So definitely an amazing place to be at.
Is this the first firm you've worked at since you were in school?
So I did internships when I was in college.
Okay.
So got a little experience through that. But
how does your experience here at Culture, how is that different from the internships you had during school?
I will say I got very lucky.
Okay.
When I was in school, I did end up with some really good internships where I felt very comfortable as well. But then you have other places where you don't necessarily feel like, you can speak up or, especially being a new designer, being in a room full of people who have so much experience, sometimes it can feel a little scary to put your 2 cents in. So I think Joseph has done an amazing job at making it a safe space to where I definitely feel heard and my opinions are definitely valued.
Now, so for some people who may not know, I think they may think of an architecture firm as a very serious place. I mean, you're doing serious work, but it doesn't seem like you have you're serious about your approach, Joseph. But it seems like the culture that you have there is very different than traditional architecture firms. As the founder of a Black-owned firm, tell me this: what are some of the challenges and achievements that come from what you're doing?
So, as a architect of color, less than 2% of all licensed architects are Black. So there are very few of us. Even more so, there are very few of us that go on to start your own firm. In that our industry is very insular, so a lot of projects come through word of mouth and through recommendations, and that's very tough when you're such a small percentage of the overall industry. So we have to go over and beyond to market our services and to get awareness. So I think we do a pretty good job when it comes to marketing our services, but also, marketing who we are. So you mentioned the fun side of culture in that, a lot of firms, they typically just market the end product. They show you the buildings. Culture is about the people. So, when you see our marketing, you're going to see a lot of our team. You're going to see a lot of our clients. Mm-hmm. When you see our projects, you're not just going to see buildings with no people in it. No, you're going to see buildings that are lived in. You're going to see office spaces. They're not going to be pristine. You're going to see office spaces that are worked in because we're a people-centered practice.
Now, DBE requirements were implemented at the federal, state, and local levels to create more equitable opportunities for business and industries that traditionally haven't been so equitable. Now, anything that's associated with creating equitable programs based on race or gender are being attacked in federal courts. Tell me, how is that affecting culture?
So, those programs provided a financial incentive for predominantly white-owned firms to work with diverse businesses. Now that DBE programs and DEI initiatives are being attacked, while they may exist in some form, those financial incentives, for the most part, have been removed. So what we have seen is there is not as much of an incentive for people to want to collaborate or bring us on the team as a DBE business.
Interesting. Now, you're a mentor, right? What do you tell young folks about what it takes to be successful in the architectural industry today?
I would say there's a level of perseverance. I would say anyone, regardless of race or gender, going to face some adversity in architecture. We spoke earlier. It's a long, drawn-out process to become an architect. And the industry is ever changing. I've had conversations with Brenda where she's like, I still feel like I'm figuring it out. And I'm like, hey, you'll always have that feeling. I honestly feel like that's the draw of architecture, though. Like, you're never going to have it always figured out. It's never going to be boring. Like, you just got to kind of embrace the journey of always growing and always developing your craft. So in that, having a level of resolve, leveraging mentorship, and then, embracing the process. I think that sometimes you can kind of get exhausted or tired of always striving to maybe get licensed or become a project architect or always trying to achieve that next thing, but just going along for the journey.
Brenda, tell me, how much is the idea of perfection in the mind of an architect?
Oh, it's constant, but you're never going to achieve complete perfection. So I think just always striving to be proud of what you're putting out there, and just having a little bit of grace with yourself 100%.
So architecture, in essence, teaches you to come to grips with perfection, but it also teaches you the nature of patience, I imagine.
Yeah, 100%.
I had a contractor once tell me that there will never be a perfect set of drawings from an architect, and there will never be a perfect building. So you got to work together to get the overall, best result possible. at the end.
Yeah, and I think even when you're in school, like they're always shoving down your throat, attention to detail, attention to detail. And so you can definitely get very clogged down to want to achieve that perfection. But, like I said, nothing's ever going to be perfect. And I think we live in a very imperfect world.
Yes, we do. Okay, so how can the architecture industry, particularly here in Nashville, how can it be improved or evolve from this new influx of diversity that you both are representing? Brenda?
Well, I think, representation has always been really big. I think, at least for me, I know that I went to school in a program where, it was like 50% women, 50% people of color. That was really big. So I know that the up and coming generations, like, they will represent a lot of people. And I think that, we see the importance of representation even in cinema, and I think it's the same with like careers because, I have little nieces and nephews where they're like, oh, wow, like you're an architect and, asking me questions and just kind of like putting that seed in their mind of like, this could be you in the future.
Now, some professional fields, they have pretty high hurdles for, the scale people want to achieve if they want to find success. What are the hurdles here in Nashville, Joseph?
I think the hurdles here in Nashville are reflected across the nation. In general, if we want to increase diversity in the profession in Nashville, we got to address the pipeline. We got to start early, right? So we got to start investing in youth. There are a lot of I'm proud to say there are a lot of youth-based programs here in Nashville that introduce, children to architecture and interiors and construction and engineering at a young age. So you have programs at the Civic Design Center and with NOMA, with Project Pipeline and with ACE. I think it's a lot easier to introduce a kid that's in middle school or early in high school to architecture versus, you got someone that's graduating saying, hey, I want to do architecture, but they don't have any math or physics or art classes. So, addressing that pipeline. And then I would say, also not just the, getting people in the profession, but getting them in impactful roles. So if you're looking at the statistics, architecture has always been known as an old man's profession and really, a old white male's profession, to be frank. So in that, but if you look at the, demographics, you're starting to see that there are, more females in the industry, traditionally more white females in the industry. But unfortunately, they're not in leadership positions. So we got to do a better job of getting more women into leadership positions, getting more people of color in the industry as well. So not just getting people in the, in the door, but actually putting them in positions of influence.
Would you advise someone, maybe a young white female who's an architect or someone else, to take a page out of your own book and start their own firm?
Yes, but I don't think that everyone's cut out for entrepreneurship. So I think everyone has their own path, and I think you just got to make the best out of the path that you're in. I think that there's a way to have impact, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an employee, whether you're adjacent to the industry. You don't necessarily have to be practicing architecture and interiors proper. You may be working for a nonprofit, but still impacting the profession as a whole.
Now, Brenda, tell me this. Say there's someone listening who has a young person in their life who's a master at Legos or popsicle sticks, and they're really making it happen. How would you advise them to support that young person and their natural abilities?
Yeah, so, he's mentioning a lot of these programs. I think starting early, definitely. And I think being all-encompassing of what it means to become a designer and an architect, because it's definitely a tough road to go through. And I will say, like, perseverance is going to be your best friend. There's, like, a lot of steps to get to where you want to go. I think just, like, kind of nurturing their creativity and their awe, always letting them ask questions and just, being there for them is really important.
All right. I got a minute left. I'm going to ask you both. Hopefully we can get this in. What does your dream city look like?
My dream city?
Yeah.
Definitely green. I know we were talking about green rooftops and all that, 100%. I think walkability too. Let me ride my bike around the city. So definitely less cars, more green.
Less cars, more green. I like how that sounds. Joseph, describe your green city to us?
I definitely agree with Brenda on the walkability, but I would say probably my ideal city is a city that's inclusive of all classes. I think as Nashville grows, we got to do a better job of, I kind of bristle at the whole idea of New Nashville, because I think a lot of native Nashvillians don't see how they fit into the new Nashville. They don't see a place for themselves in the new city. So, as we grow and develop, preserving some of that existing fabric so that the people that have been here understand how they contribute to this growing vision of the city.
I want to thank you both for being here. My guests are Joseph Cole, CEO of Culture, Architecture, and Design, and Brenda Cano Trejo, a designer with Culture, Architecture, and Design. Thank you again, both of you, for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
And tomorrow, after This Is Nashville, WPLM will be airing a special version of The Middle with Jeremy Hobson. They'll be talking about the Democratic National Convention going on right now in Chicago. You don't want to miss it, so it's tomorrow at 1 p.m. after our program. And thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This Is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Mary Mancini. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. The conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram. Tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. You can call us at 615-751-2500. That's 615-751-2500, and leave a message. Note, we may use that message on air at some point. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekulona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and be good to each other.